Hi, everybody. This is Marlene with Miami Ghost Chronicles, Stories of the Supernatural. And I hope you enjoy this new show, whether you're viewing it on the internet or listening to a podcast version of the episode. I do want to thank you for being part of my audience. You can also find links to videos or podcasts on MiamiGhostChronicles.com, as well as where you can submit your story about any eerie experiences you've had, which I would love to hear about. Just go to the Submit Your Story tab. Please subscribe to our channel so that you receive notification of when we release a new show. And find us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. This is where I usually live stream and where I give you a behind-the-scenes look at locations where new episodes are being filmed at. I also tell you about all the interesting guests that will be appearing soon on Stories of the Supernatural. I hope you enjoy the show, and I think you are all wonderful. Hi everybody, it's Marlene with Miami Ghost Chronicles, Stories of the Supernatural. How's everybody doing? Good, I hope I'm doing good. Yes. You all saw my last show that I held up, my latest addition to the dog family, right? Well, I know people have been asking me for an update, so I'm going to give a quick one, just a quick one. Here he is. Here he is, yes. His eyes are still closed, and I've got a few names I'm thinking about, but I haven't come up with an official one. Right now, I just call him like Tarzan Boy. That's it. Very original, but what can I say? But anyway, I'm super, super excited because of the guest I have. This gentleman's name is Stephen Lancaster. Okay, and of course, he's involved in the paranormal. As a matter of fact, he's a researcher, and he has been investigating ghosts since 1997. Okay, just like moi, since the 90s, even though before that. But and he is the producer of MonsterVisionTV. He's an independent paranormal investigation, which is an paranormal investigation program with nearly 2 million views worldwide. In 2007, he formed P.I.T, P-I-T, I love that, Paranormal Investigation Team. And now he's been interviewed on hundreds of radio shows, and also he's also appeared on A&E's My Ghost Story. All right, now we were talking about this briefly before we started going, that in 2018 he's going to deliver his latest novel titled Norman, the Doll That Had to Be Locked Away. And at some point I'm going to have to ask him about that, because believe me, you're going to see you're going to see a cover of that book on there. But like all things, I know there's people out there going, "Oh no, it's the doll thing." But anyway, okay guys, today, how are you doing, Stephen? How are you doing today?
Ma'am, I am fantastic. Thank you for having me on your show.
Absolutely. It is my pleasure. My pleasure, totally. And Steve, I'm going to ask you what I ask all my guests, which is, how did you become involved in the paranormal? Absolutely. Now you're an adult, but how did that start for you? Was it something that happened to you as a child?
As a matter of fact, it was. And up until recently, there was only one place you could read that story, and that was in my first book. The origin story, the prequel, so they say. But recently, I wrote a kind of a little bit. I helped this other author out, and she was writing a book on the spirits of Christmas, the haunted stories you don't really ever hear around the holidays.
Right. Okay.
And she asked me to help her with that, and she wanted to use my origin story because my origin story was kind of similar to that. And basically what happened, to date myself here.
Go right ahead.
in 1987, I was 10 years old, and I slept in bunk beds with my brother. I was on the top bunk, and he was on the bunk below. There was a 5 years difference between us. He was 5, I was 10. And I woke up in the middle of the night with something tugging on my ankles. Okay. Now, at first, I thought it was just him, just goofing around like brothers do,
Right.
So I leaned over, I looked down, and he was fast asleep. I was like, there's no way he can move that fast, So I dozed back off, and I felt it again. Well, this time I sat up. And as I'm sitting up, something grabbed both of my wrists, and they grabbed my wrist with such force you could actually see the indentation in my skin,
Oh,
but there was nothing there. And I tried to pull and pull and pull away, but it just kept trying to pull me kind of towards the bottom of the bed. And eventually it pulled with such force, it flipped me to where I was, to the point where I was facing the bottom of the bed, and I was now laying on my stomach. So I sat back up, it grabbed me again. And meanwhile, the whole time this is going on, I'm trying to scream for my parents. You know, I was a 10-year-old kid, but I couldn't get anything out. It was like everything was just muted. You know, it's like I didn't have the power or the energy to say anything or speak. And I finally broke free, and I was pulling with such force that I flew back across the bed, and my head hit that 80s wood paneling,
oh my
you know,
God.
that we had on our walls, and actually put a dent in the wall. And at that point, I was able to scream for my parents, and they of course jump out of bed. They come running in the room, flip the light on, and at 10 years old, they dismiss it as a nightmare. You were just dreaming. It was just a bad dream, Stephen. And that was not the case. Well, I grew up in a very strict military Christian home.
Okay.
So you didn't talk about these kind of things. You know, the paranormal, the supernatural, that was taboo. It was the Bible or nothing, which is kind of ironic if you think about it, because, you know, the Bible's probably the most paranormal book ever written.
Yeah, it does have a lot of references to stuff in there.
You know, when you break it down. So for 10 years, from 1987 to 1997, I spent a lot of time at libraries. I would check out books. I would sneak them into the house. You know, on the occult, on parapsychology, on cryptozoology, just anything I could find to try to find an answer, you know, to what happened to me and why did that happen to me.
Exactly.
And in 97, I finally, word got around in my small town in Maryland, that's where I grew up, that I was the ghost guy. I was the guy that knew all this stuff. So I started taking cases for people.
Okay.
And it just kind of, you know, exploded from there, and basically just started on me trying to find an answer as to why that happened. And to wrap this story up real quick for you, I would say 7 or 8 years ago, because obviously I live in the South now, but my family came down for Thanksgiving.
Okay.
And we were at Thanksgiving dinner, and my parents, you know, they were saying how proud they were that I've become an author now. You know, I had 3 novels out at that point, and, you know, they really started talking the paranormal with me, which was completely out of character. You know, this was the family I grew up with where you didn't talk about that stuff. And that's when my mom laid it on me. She said, you know, Stephen, when you were a kid and you had what happened happen, we never told you, but when I was 10 years old, the same exact thing happened to me.
Oh, my God.
And it just gave me chills just telling you that right now, because it blew my mind. And then Mom and Dad start sharing these stories, and they said they just didn't want to tell me that stuff as a kid because they didn't want it to spook me, or look how I turned out anyway, you know. That was kind of my response.
Well, because of that, I ended up like this.
Right, but, you know, to find out the same thing had happened to my mother at the same age was pretty, it added some validity, you know, to what happened. It told me that, okay, it wasn't a nightmare, and I didn't start this journey for nothing, you know?
And I have to ask you, this happened only once? It was only one occurrence that happened?
There were more than just that in that house.
Okay.
In the first book I wrote, it's really basically the beginnings of what I have now become. But, you know, the first couple cases, you know, the story I just told, and some other parts of what happened in that house. And we later found out that, tragically, I found out from a neighbor that the previous owner of that house had hanged himself in the attic.
Oh.
Now, there was another instance where I had, at this point, we had split up rooms. You know, I was getting too old to be sharing a room with my brother. And so I had my own room, and I woke up in the middle of the night to a baby crying. which I could never figure out
Oh,
why.
wow.
And walked. I had a drum set in my room, and I get up out of bed and I walk over to this drum set, and I see a baby laying there. And I'll be dead honest with you, I turned right around and just went back to bed.
Like, okay.
I didn't even think twice about it. And then the third occurrence, the final occurrence before we moved from that house, my brother and I were outside. We were playing with our neighbors, playing G.I. Joe or something. Who knows? But we were out back, and my brother, who is a complete and total non-believer, still to this day, I'm the Ghostbuster. He jokes around all the time. He yells at me that somebody was looking out his bedroom window, which was formerly both of our bedroom, and
Wow.
and as I look up, the window breaks.
Holy crap.
So I grab a baseball bat and I run into the house because mom and dad are at work, and I'm thinking, okay, I'm the guy that's in charge, and I run up the steps and into my
Okay.
brother's bedroom. And sure enough, the window is shattered, but there wasn't a shard of glass inside. It was all outside, laying on the roof. And, dad got home, and how do you explain this to him?
It's like, it
And
wasn't
well,
me. Like the typical
which of
kid thing.
course we got the blame for it. Oh, we shot it with a BB gun, and I'm trying to say, all the glass is on the outside, Dad. If we had shot from the outside, it would be on the inside. But shortly after that, we moved away, and I would love an opportunity now,
To go back.
30 some years later, to go back and investigate that house. And the house was up for sale last year, and I
Really?
contacted the real estate agent just out of curiosity, and we talked back and forth, and she already knew who I was, and she didn't want anything to do with it. She said, please do not tell anybody that this is the house. I'm trying to sell it. And,
Oh, of course.
and I'm telling her, well, you probably should tell her, because they're going to find things that they probably don't want to.
Wow. That is such a great story. But you know what? You're not the first one I've heard of, Stephen, that has that childhood experience. And then the parents, in an effort to do exactly what your parents wanted to do, which was to make you feel safe, it's like they poo-poo it like it's just your imagination. It's a bad dream. And it's like, come on, as a child, even as a child, when something is like, this was not a dream, or this was not a nightmare.
Well, I
And
think a lot of it, well, you're right, because a lot of the people I've met over the years, everybody has an origin story. There's
mhm,
either a noble reason you're in this field, like,
exactly.
because something happened to you, or it's just like the wannabe rock stars that saw it on TV and they think it's
Right.
cool and they go out and do it. And, I think in my father's case, he retired a couple years ago. He was a literal rocket scientist.
Okay.
Try living up to that, okay?
Yeah.
And I think, he's the guy who designed the engine for the Patriot missile, if that tells you
Wow.
anything,
Okay, so
during Desert Storm.
he's all about the mathematics, or in other words,
Yes.
the
And
tangible stuff.
I think it was like, you know what? I don't need anybody knowing my kid's out there in some other dimension, looking for these things. But now, like I said, it's like a complete 180. They are so open to it, and they talk about it all the time now, and it's great.
Well, again, you're not the first one. That same thing I've heard. Things happen. Everybody doesn't talk about it. The parents, let's not talk about that. Your imagination, bad nightmare. Fast forward 20 years, nobody in the house. Same thing. The family gets together, and then all of a sudden, everybody comes forward and admits to their experiences. And it was like, you're kidding. Why didn't you tell me? Everybody has these experiences on and off, but it takes like 20 years and to be out of that house for everybody to actually talk about it. Even though you think, well, it's the house, but then you're telling me that your mom had the same experience when she was the same age. And I take
Right.
it, she lived in a different house, or was it the same
It
house?
was a different house. It was a different house, but it was a very similar situation. And just to touch base on what you said about people waiting to come out about it, just look at our society, really.
Yeah.
Back in the 80s and 90s, talking about this stuff was kind of taboo.
Oh,
You know,
yes.
if you talked about my house is haunted. I saw a ghost. People thought you were crazy. And
Yes.
then, then it hit the 2000s and it became all the rage. And then everybody wanted to tell their ghost story. And it's
Right.
not just the paranormal, it's everything. 30
Hmm.
years ago, you couldn't get away with saying certain words on
Oh
television. Now you
no.
can get away with saying just about anything. So
Or
I don't
much
think
less
we're that.
were you gonna televise what was going on in your personal life, and now everybody wants to be a TV reality, reality TV star. Yeah, okay, so you
Right.
want to come in and watch everything I do? Okay. But
And the
yes.
funny part about it, and a lot of people really don't think about it, but the funny part about all of it is since 57, 58, 1957, 58, there has always been some form of paranormal programming from One Step Beyond to
Yes.
the Twilight Zone to even
Yes.
Scooby Doo.
Yes,
Scooby Doo, they
exactly.
were paranormal investigators to unsolved mysteries. There has all every generation has had paranormal programming.
Right. But it's always been because I mean, like yourself, I had always been interested when I was growing up, it was Hans Holzer, and they had a couple of shows, and of course Scooby Doo. But it was always like, again, it was like, oh, it's a kids show, and like I say, people don't realize that back in the '90s there was no digital camera or all this equipment that you got now. As far
Right.
as it was much more basic, and even if you were using a camera, you know how much money you would end up spending on developing pictures sometimes of nothing because there was no digital option where you could discard what wasn't any good. Or, a lot of the thermal cameras and stuff, some of the stuff that they use nowadays.
Well, now
Um,
that you mention that, if you think about it, and you look back through history, at one point in time in the United States, you could actually get a degree as a parapsychologist.
I did not know that.
Now it's kind of a joke, but
Well, that's
um,
right. Yeah, you could, but it was like, um, and it's really funny because sometimes even though you could get it, I believe it was also very restrictive as far as if you ever wanted to produce any type of result, it had to be not concrete. It had to be beyond concrete. It was like super uber duper mega. They were held to a higher standard as far as parapsychology was concerned
well,
to
not only
prove.
that, but in the grand scheme of things, they have. If we were to compare, we say, yeah, now we've got all the bells and whistles, we have more tools to use, but we also have more tools that are easier to manipulate.
Oh yes, we do.
Back
Yes.
then they were using reel to reel and actual film and actual tape, that you could tell it was a lot harder to edit. You couldn't really fake anything.
No, no, you
Now with
couldn't.
the digital stuff,
Yeah.
you throw a video up on YouTube and it's real, you were there, you filmed it, but that
Yes.
was one thing I always disagreed with. I watched like the first two seasons of Ghost Hunters, and I remember the one guy, the bald guy, saying,
Mm-hmm.
"If you can reproduce it, it's not paranormal. If you can recreate it,
But
it's not
that's
paranormal."
that's not fair
But
though.
it's not, because there isn't anything today that a 14-year-old with their cell phone
Yeah.
could not recreate.
Exactly.
So it's tough, and that's what makes the paranormal field tough to really get substance behind it and support behind it and grant money and that kind. I'm very
Exactly.
lucky, you know. In 2012, I started to get cataloged in the government
Mm-hmm.
classification stuff, and that's a big deal,
Yes.
So that tells me that they know that there's stuff out there.
Of course. And again, I know that a lot of what's in this field is very difficult to quantify. You can't
Hmm.
reproduce it at will. You can't sometimes put in under, let's say, laboratory control circumstances and produce the results. It's just, and that's why, some scientists are like, nah, but again, just because it can't be done doesn't mean it doesn't exist. And I think a lot of it is shifting also with certain discoveries in physics as
Hmm.
far as either parallel dimensions or, in other words, there's more, absolutely more than what just we can perceive with our senses, with our five senses, that is.
Well, you're touching base on a pet peeve of mine, and what that is, and I really, really grow tiresome of hearing it, is we base everything on our own science. You
Yes.
know, they say, oh, there's no possible way there could be life on such and such a planet
Right.
because there isn't air and there isn't water. Well, what's to say there isn't a life form that doesn't require those things?
Exactly.
You know, and they pull the same thing with the paranormal. Well, that's not physically possible because this, that, and the other thing.
Hmm.
Well, we're basing everything off of our Earth, off of the Earth science. There's a whole science out we haven't even began to write. You know, it baffles me that actual scientists say these things because
Exactly.
that's arrogant. That's saying that everything in our vast universe, which we don't even know has an ending, is based off of what is Earth and what we know we have to eat, we have
Exactly.
to drink water, we have to breathe air. Why are we to assume that everything has to be that way?
Exactly. And just because you can't prove it under the circumstances that say that science dictates does not mean that it doesn't exist. Yeah, as
Right.
far as again, and but I think a little bit of that is shifting. I think because, for example, let's say in the medical field, that they're studying more and more about near-death experiences. And they've been able to basically measure it and think.
Hmm.
There's studies along those lines which kind of leave at least a question mark as far as that there is something or of our self-awareness that happens with us once our bodies are dead or
Well,
for
the
all intent.
funny thing is our science actually proves life after death, yet they don't acknowledge it. And I'll tell you
No.
why. Because the human body is of a bioelectrical makeup.
Right.
We all have electricity in our body. That is fact. That is science. There is electricity in our body. Well, as we know, as science has taught us, energy is infinite. Energy does not die. It simply changes form. And
Exactly.
this is worldwide recognized. That is fact. Energy does not die. So when our human body expires, that electricity, that energy just doesn't turn off because that's not how it works. It doesn't die. It just simply changes
Exactly.
form. Our own science has said that over and over again. Yet they refuse to acknowledge the fact that something happens after you die. But it does,
Right.
because that energy goes somewhere.
And and even the people sometimes that are hardcore skeptics, they've had what I call that they become situational psychics because something happens, whether it's to them personally or somebody close to them. They experience, they either sense, see something,
Mm-hmm.
and maybe once or twice in their lives that they can't account for. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
and they don't realize that sometimes, unfortunately, when the body and the mind is put under a certain amount of stress, that's exactly what happens. Okay, but again, they don't want to discount it. And there's a lot of people that I say, for all the people that, especially now, that come forward and they volunteer stories of either psychic phenomena or ghosts or paranormal events, anything, precognition, there's a whole slew of people that never, ever talk about it. Ever.
That's very, very true. And that reminds me. Did you ever see the movie Red Lights?
No. Which one
I
is that?
I highly recommend it. It went under the radar.
Mm-hmm.
It's a paranormal movie, and believe it or not, it has Sigourney Weaver and Robert De Niro in it. And the
Red
kid,
lights.
I'll call him a kid, but he's probably as old as I am. He was in Red Eye. He was the Scarecrow in the Batman movies. Anyway,
Uh-huh.
it's about this university, Sigourney Weaver and her understudy, this kid, and they are out to disprove the paranormal
Oh
and
my God,
psychic
yes.
phenomena.
I saw that. I saw that. I just didn't
And,
remember by
yeah,
its title.
and Robert De Niro, he's the hoaxer. He's the guy who's putting on these shows and pretending to
Right.
say do all. But meanwhile, the entire time, and here's spoilers for the listeners out there,
Yes.
the kid that's the understudy actually has these psychic powers, but he never tells anybody.
Yes.
And he's actually working with somebody who's out to disprove it. It was a very interesting
Right,
movie.
right. That in it she attempts, where start trying to capture like, oh, because what they do is they bust these psychics, like that, oh, that
Right.
they're being get fed information beforehand
Right.
about
Yep. That's it.
subjects.
Yep.
And yeah, I remember that was I just didn't remember the title. That was a very interesting. Um, and that's another thing sometimes that, as far as, let's say, psychic phenomena or psychic, or, but, just like if, you go to supposedly, let's say, a haunted place, it's not an on-demand thing. You could go sometimes and
That's
nothing
correct.
happens, nothing is witnessed, nothing is felt, or in the case of a psychic, where they can't reproduce whatever because it ebbs and flows. Human beings are fluid, and things like that are fluid also. Yes, there's some places that you go more often than not and you get something, but there's times that people go, nothing happens, but that doesn't mean that nothing is there.
That's very correct, and I'm glad you said that because not a lot of people say that. They're too quick to jump the gun, so to speak, and that's what bothers me about the reality television shows
Yes.
is they make it out like they can go into a home or a business or wherever and have it all figured out in one night. But
That's
like you
laughable.
said, it's not on call. And for people who have followed my books, they understand me very well. The cases that I take, I spend years on
Okay.
these cases. So when you read a chapter that's about one case, that took years to give you that information.
Exactly.
Because there's nights, some of the most haunted locations I have been in my life.
Mm-hmm.
There have been nights where absolutely nothing happened, and there have been
Yes.
nights where it was off the hook.
Yes.
And so you can't expect to be the client who has lived something for, let's say, 20 years in one night. You can't expect, in order to be the client, you have to be there as much as possible.
Exactly. Exactly. That's why I say, let's say, for example, historical landmark houses. I say the ones that really got good stories really are the docents, the
Hmm.
tour guides, the people that are there continuously that really will tell you the really actual stories. And, and I know of some activity in certain houses that are cyclical, even if it's intelligent. Yeah, they just go, it just goes underground for a while and then it comes back up. And then it dissipates and it comes back up. And then there's others, I think it has to do with either the people that are there, the energy that's being put out. But usually the people that are there, like caretakers or things like that, those are the ones that usually have the really actual, what I call the real stories.
Hmm.
Whether it doesn't, like I said, it doesn't have to be a full body apparition that you're like, oh my God. It's just stuff that after a while they know, oh, it's that thing, whatever it is. And yeah, I totally agree that unfortunately some shows, they want to make it look like that you can step in there, maybe go 1, 2, 3 days, and one of two things: either it's over exaggerated what they produce, which is like, wow, that's incredible, what great timing you have, or the other end of it, which is like, oh, we didn't capture anything. We put on all of the cameras and all the gadgets and equipments, and we didn't get anything, at least not significant. Guess nothing's here. It's just maybe, if at best, residual. It's like, how would you know? you know?
Right, right. And I'll give you a good example. Um, like I said, the places I investigate and the places I research, it's not a one night stand.
Right.
It's as long as it's welcomed by the client, it's over and over and over and over again.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a place in Little River, South Carolina called the Brentwood Wine Bistro
Okay.
that I have researched since 2007. And in last year, on October 13th of last year, I released a documentary on the Brentwood Wine Bistro that basically marked 10 years of investigating this location.
Wow.
So it's interesting to watch because
Yes.
you see me in 2007 and then you see kind of years after, and even some one of my good friends is from Ghost Hunters International, and she makes an appearance, and some other people, and it basically showcases 10 years of researching this one location. That has never, ever been done before. Because these producers, these television shows, they're on a schedule. They have to have their 10-episode season by,
Sure.
this date. This was something, we took 10 years worth of data, 10 years worth of video footage, interviews, all this stuff, slapped it all
Yes.
together, released it in October, and it just killed it. It just absolutely killed it. People loved it. And
Yeah.
it's really, I'm not trying to gloat. It's just it's the first of its kind
Yeah.
that shows like, wow, myself and my colleagues worked at this location for 10 years, and we still do.
Exactly.
This was
Exactly.
just, and it's funny because when we finished the final production of it, the owner of the place, he's like, after he saw the final cut of it, he's like, let's make it a trilogy. I was like, when I'm 60, bud,
So
I really
like
don't.
Harry was like, what? Another 20 years? This is
Yeah.
just the first part.
Yeah, I really don't think so.
Well, and a lot of times, and one of the things that I've talked about is that people don't realize that some locations are known for certain entities or personalities, whatever you want to call them, whether it's the tragic person or the person that died there, owned it, or built it, whatever. I said, but in my experience, sometimes there's a lot of entities or discarnates that are not tied to a location, but they're just as desperate. They want to make communication. These are the ones that are confused, whatever their story might be. And sometimes, especially when it's a little bit more extended time, I'm not talking about 2 or 3 days. Sometimes they'll come in to these locations and try to make an appearance or communicate, and then people there will be like, "Who's that? What is that?" Like, where did this come from? And it's like, if you think that this is just like nobody else from the outside, no discarnates from that are not tied to or part of that location are going to try to come through, I got news for you. Not really, especially if you've got somebody that's sensitive or psychic, or they're trying to obtain communication. Because some of them, that's exactly what they've been waiting for, and they come in. So, in other words, I say, for every paranormal investigation, despite what you may know about the history of a location or about what people claim that they've seen, you always have to leave the door open that somebody, a new cast is going to come in. A new cast member is going to come in. And a lot of times, some of these shows, they'll leave that question like, who was that? I was like, that could have been anybody. For all you know, this might have been somebody maybe that that drifted over, wanted to talk, get known, be acknowledged, whatever. Or in some cases, I've heard of, you have a bad accident, for example, down the
Oh,
block
jeez, don't
at
say
the
that.
closest intersection, and for some reason, this spirit ends up at a certain place, whether it's because it's got high energy, especially if you're talking a commercial place which has got a lot of human activity coming in forwards, like, and I'm sure you've seen it, certain places are hotbeds, whether it's hospitals, hotels, with just a lot of human energy coming and going. You're going to have discarnate spirits that are just lost. They're still self-aware, but they just kind of miss the part about, am I dead? What's going on? Or if they do realize they're dead, that for some reason they're kind of anchored here, either because of fear, or they don't understand what's coming afterwards, or in some cases, how you hear that story about that your family comes for you. You die, and the people that love you come for you.
Right,
But
right,
what
right,
if you're
right.
what if you're not really thinking you're dead, and grandma comes for you, and you're like, wait a minute, you're dead. I'm not going with you. I'm still alive. Wait. And they kind of miss that jumping off point, and then they still like stuck, trying maybe to communicate or have somebody tell them, hey, what happened? They just can't understand that you can have that self-awareness and still not have a living human body.
Well, I'm gonna. You kind of touched base on something that when I do lectures and stuff like that, I speak about at great lengths. Um, Now, a lot of what you said too, uh, I don't like to get into a lot. The whole crossing over, the whole stuff like that. That we're basing that on religion.
Right. Well,
I try not to, and I mean no offense to anybody. I went to a Christian academy growing up, so that's my pass. I try not to bring religion into it
hmm
because you can't prove it for one,
right.
and it's you automatically go into a bias. But what you said about things popping up in other places, I completely agree with. My second novel, Dark Spirits,
Right.
the entire book, it goes from one case to another case to another case to another case. Each chapter is basically a different case, yet there is a similarity.
Okay.
And I I believe in what I refer to as spiritual magnetism.
Yes.
And I'll describe it to you like this. And this is pretty much how I describe it to everybody. When you take a paper clip and you rub it vigorously on a magnet,
hmm
for a brief amount of time, that paper clip becomes magnetized and it can pick up other paper clips.
Right.
And, I'm not talking about the weekend warriors that go out and investigate or
hmm
they just doing it for the kicks or whatever. I'm talking about people that live paranormal research. That's their occupation, that's their job, like me, and so you really don't have a break from it.
Exactly.
And what I have seen many times, and that's pretty much what Dark Spirits was all about, is when you spend so many nights, so many months, years at a location, uh, you become spiritually magnetized because you are connecting with something we have yet to understand, first off, but you're connecting with that energy.
Yes.
And I've seen it with myself and my colleagues that we would leave said location,
hmm
go to our respective homes, and the same exact activity would begin to happen at our homes. And
Yes.
it would go on for a few days and then finally wear off.
Exactly.
And that's where you get into the concept of attachments. Can things attach?
Right.
I do think things can attach themselves to you and follow you around and when especially when it's specific things. When you investigate a lot, and my case files are over 1,000 at this point.
hmm
Um, you see similarities, and let's say something's unique. And when you're at a location and there's this unique occurrence that happens that you've never seen before or is very rare, let's just say,
Exactly.
and then you come home and that same exact thing happens, what are the chances?
Exactly.
That's that brief moment that you're mad because again, we're electricity.
hmm
It's all I think it all boils down to energy and connecting, and I think a lot of that is the result of deja vu.
Yes.
When you walk, you're walking down the street. Oh man, I feel like this happened before. Did you just
Yes.
walk through somebody's energy that actually did happen to them before? I mean,
Yes.
and possession could be the same thing. You get a certain person's energy gets trapped in you. I mean, we could go on about this forever,
Well, no,
but
you know what? And I don't do it anymore, but I'm a trained hypnotherapist, and I dealt. I worked in alternative areas of hypnosis, and one of them, besides past life regression, the other things was attachment, spiritual attachments. And I tell everybody, and especially like you pointed out that now it's become a fad of doing, of the like you said, the weekend paranormal researcher, or in some cases the legend trippers and things like that.
right,
I tell people, you know what, if you have to be really careful because normally, like what you described, if your aura is intact, yeah, you might have, like you said, after a few days it kind of fizzles out or it goes away, kind of like dissipates. But if you are somebody that, and I tell everybody, if you've got a problem, either ranging from mental illness or substance abuse to, let's say at that moment in your life, you're going through something like difficult. It happens to everybody, whether it's like,
sure,
physical, like you're really run down, exhausted, maybe you got a lot of things going on, or just things. I tell everybody, you need to stay away from the supernatural stuff, because what happens is that you become the target, especially of a dark attachment. Okay, and and I tell people, there's some people, like, I tell them, look, if this is something that you're just going through right now, hey, like I tell them, Ouija board, pass on it. Going to the cemetery, thanks, no. Paranormal investigations, not now. Later on, when you get that things back in balance in your life, personal, emotional or physical, that's different. And I say, and then there's people that I tell them, if I were you, I would never go near anything having to do with the paranormal, because there's just certain things about you, whether it's emotional or physical trauma, that you're just a weak link and you're always going to be a target. And if I were you, I would never ever dabble in that. And people don't realize that there's something about us as human beings that some cases it's just an entity that wants to communicate for whatever reason. Like you said, they kind of like want to. And then there's others that do have a little bit darker intent, that want desperately what they don't have anymore, which is a living human body to experience what you can't unless you have a living human body to do so. And there's just people that are more vulnerable than others because of that. And I mean, I've run across that as far as under certain conditions. So, and like I tell everybody, there's certain people that should just never ever do. I would even tell them, if I were you, I would, if I ever had to go, like, say, even to a cemetery, I would just go cautiously because of what's going on. And others, it's just, there's times that you need to pass on it. And I don't know if you've run across that, Stephen, in your experience, as far as when you've been doing paranormal research, that you have felt, hey, maybe I need to take a break for a while. Has that ever happened to you?
Okay, this is going to be long-winded.
Go right ahead.
First off, it's uncanny how much you and I think alike. I used to, I want to say from 2008, 2009, for about a year, by request, a school asked me to do it. They asked me to teach a paranormal class.
Okay. Because
they were so sick of the television shows and people mimicking what they're seeing on TV, like Zach Baggins, everything's a demon and we're yelling at it and all that.
Yeah, it's graduated to that,
so,
yes.
I taught a class, creatively titled Paranormal 101. And the very first thing I did in the class, I had a PowerPoint, laptop set up, projector, all this stuff. And I told everybody, I said, paranormal investigating starts with this. And I popped up on the screen. The background was black, big white letters, the word you. Paranormal investigating starts with you. If you're feeling sick, if you don't think you can do it, if you've got stress in your life, blah, 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 everything you just said, don't do it. Mm-hmm. If you're not the top of your game, don't do it. And I'm not even going to reiterate what you said, but that you just made me think back to that 10 years ago, that was the very first thing I would tell my students, is it starts with you. And then, I would elaborate from there that, what, you need to become a camera expert. You need to be able to learn how to fake a ghost. Because if you don't know how to fake one, you don't know how to call one out.
Exactly.
A fraud. And learning your technology, learning how to do this, that, the other thing, learning the stuff a lot of us know now is common knowledge, what causes a K2 meter to go off just by things that are around, that has nothing to do with a ghost. But yeah, for me, it's a little different. I don't know, you might want to call borderline psychotic. But for me, I try everything.
Okay.
If I am down, it doesn't matter. In order for me to really research everything. You have to really research everything.
Yes.
And I guess I'm willing to put myself through that, so to speak. There was a point in my life where I did stop. In 2014, I flipped a car 7 times down the highway, and the destruction was so bad that when EMS and fire truck, everybody showed up, they did not expect anybody to be alive in that car.
Wow.
And I was alive. And it was one of those moments where I went black when it happened.
Okay.
And I didn't see a bright white light. My life didn't flash before my eyes.
All the typical stuff, huh?
That stuff. But it really made me think, I've spent my life caring more about what happens after this, after our life, than I am right now caring about what's going on right now. So I did take a break for a bit and just let it go for a while. But it's just who I am. And I had to go back to it. But yeah, I agree with you. I think most people, take your time with it. This isn't something, just don't mimic what you see on TV. I tell people read as much as you can, and then start off small, don't take on things you can't handle.
Right.
Because there are dark things out there that can and will ruin your life.
Yes. And I agree with you. And that's why, and the reason why also, if you're a person that, because nobody leads a perfect life, but in other words, you know how to handle stressful situations when they come in your personal life, and everybody has them. They come and they go, and that's fine, but there's a lot of people that sometimes, unfortunately, they get into this to serve as a distraction. Like, they got really deep things going on, either psychological or, whatever, emotional. And this is like, they're kind of like distracted by this, and it's like, you really don't realize that you're putting a bullseye on your head, okay, for attracting what you don't want to attract. Exactly like what you just described. Because they all think that, we're going to go out there, and we're going to see something, and it's going to be scary, and okay. And then we'll just go home, and it'll be over. And it's like, yeah, but you know what? You wouldn't be the first person that I've run across that, contrary to what you see on the TV shows, it's not like 3 days later you've got stuff flying around your house. Sometimes It's very slow how all of a sudden things start to unravel for you, worse than before. And I guarantee you the point of origin is going to be when you went a certain place or did something. Why you and maybe not everybody else? Ask yourself why. Usually it's
go ahead. I'm
No,
sorry.
Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, to expand on things you said earlier and what you're saying now, my degree is in psychology.
Mm-hmm.
That's my specialty. And you touched base with it. You mentioned it earlier, drug abuse, mental illness,
right?
That kind of thing. Those are the things I first look for in a client.
Yes.
Is there a 30-pack of beer in the fridge? Is there, Xanax and Percocet and stuff? And, I look for child abuse. And unfortunately, I've had cases where it was actual child abuse.
Yes.
And they were trying to pawn it off as demon attacks and all this other stuff. And I had to, handle that legally. But, when it comes to like the people I work with,
mm-hmm.
Whether it was through the P.I.T or colleagues I work with now, everybody has a background check ran on them. Everybody has a psychological analysis.
Right.
I have a lot of military I work with, a lot of law enforcement I work with, electricians, carpenters, people that can go into a house and explain things away.
Sure.
A lot of people have this misconception that I'm a believer through and through, and when I go in, I automatically believe what you say, and I'm here to support what you say. That is the absolute opposite.
No, you're right.
I come in and try to disprove in every way I can, and then we go from there. But
Exactly.
it all starts with, because I've seen it so many times with other teams, even these television teams that are casted. Uh, you know, they're con
Yes.
artists or they're drug addicts or they do have mental illness, and
Mm-hmm.
that kind of stuff is what hurts this field
Oh,
and
sure.
is partly why the majority of society doesn't even take it seriously.
Right.
Television has done more damage to this field than it has good.
Yes. Yes. And for example, on what you said, that thing. One time I was in a case. This was what, over 10 years ago, and I remember I had interviewed the family. Well, I interviewed the mother over the phone before we went out there. Their claims were that they had a teenage son in the house and that the grandmother who had passed away was communicating with him via a cell phone that was disconnected. Plus, other things were going on in the house.
Mm-hmm.
So I interviewed her. She described what was going on. I said, "How about your son? I mean, how's he doing in school? I mean, what's going on?" Because I'm thinking, okay, PK activity. Do we have a poltergeist thing going on developing here? Where's Oh no, he's fine at school. He's great. He's nothing. He's doing really well. His grades. Well, okay. Get there. Really nice neighborhood. Very nice house. First thing I notice when I get there is a couple steps out with what looks like a little kid. I'm not kidding you. It was like a little kid. Turns out this was the high schooler. I'm thinking to myself, this might be a problem. This is a high schooler that looks much, when I say much, much younger than what he really is. So I'm sure he's getting grief somewhere along the line, being in high school and looking like he's in grade school. But I said, okay. So one of the questions that we usually asked was, is there any medications that you all take? Okay. And she said, yeah, me and my husband, we both take antidepressants. I said, that's fine. That's okay. Doesn't mean anything one way or the other. So I remember we were in the house and there was a lot of weird things, but I'm going to get to the part that I'm like, and I remember we were just taking base readings, looking at the temperature. I was just going through the house, and all of a sudden I looked down the hallway that leads, and you could look into the kitchen, and I see Dad pouring himself a big glass of, I don't know what type of alcohol. I don't know if it was whiskey or scotch. I don't know what. But right there, all the alarm bells went off for me because I'm thinking to myself, whoa, wait, you guys are taking prescription drugs for depression or for whatever's going on, but you're pouring yourself a big drink. I'm thinking to myself, oh God, right there, the whole shift of the investigation was maybe there is something going on. One thing doesn't preclude the other. But as far as their credibility goes, it was like, okay, there might be a problem here, okay, because you're not supposed to be mixing a lot of these medications with alcohol.
Very true.
You
Very
know,
true. My wife is a nurse, and yeah,
and it's like,
I've been very educated on that
right,
stuff.
and it was like, and I mean, I didn't know exactly what the drugs were. I don't know, but she was the one that told me that they were taking something, and I was like, and to make a long story short, it was an unusual household, and I, short of having stayed there longer, we didn't really capture anything. And I think it was more, as a matter of fact, I think it was more a situational thing with the family and maybe even with the son as far as the way he looked and maybe the parents both having things going on with them that was causing more of the problem. That I'm not saying that there maybe wasn't communication from the grandmother that passed on, but at the same time, it left a lot in doubt as to the veracity of how accurate they were about the experiences that were going on. So I understand exactly what you mean as far as when you go in there, you're looking for is the source of what you're saying, or that maybe you're seeing things or witnessing things as like, is it because you're taking prescription drugs with alcohol? Oh boy, yeah. That'll do it to most people when you start hearing or seeing things that are either not there or grossly exaggerated. So,
Well,
and a lot of people
let
don't
me add
realize
to
that
that.
a lot of investigators do look at that. We don't go in there thinking, "Oh yeah, it's paranormal." Sure.
Right. Well, let me add to that too, because it's not a general rule. It goes back to the paranormal investigator starts with you.
Yes.
And you have to learn, you have to be a profiler.
Yes.
And I mean that in a positive way, not a negative way.
Mm-hmm.
You just have to be able to read people, and sometimes maybe they're taking that drink because of what is happening.
Oh, sure.
And you can tell an alcoholic. You
Yeah.
can look into their eyes. Do they have
Yes.
a yellow tint to their eyes? Do they
Mm-hmm.
have red rashes? you know
Exactly.
you have to. And luckily my wife, like I said, who's a nurse, has taught me these things.
Right.
And so I can go in and I can talk to a client, and one pops into my mind instantly. And he was drinking when he was talking to me, but you could tell he wasn't an alcoholic
Exactly.
when
And there's a
when one
difference.
when the one drink he starts slurring and kind of losing his train of thought. And an alcoholic's not like that.
Mm-hmm.
An alcoholic can drink all day and you'd never even know they were drinking all day. you
Right.
know but and I'll be the first to tell you, there have been times in my life where I have investigated these dark cases,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm not going to use the case as an excuse,
Right.
but there has been times where I have taken a bottle just to try to get rid of it,
Okay.
try to forget about it, you
Right.
know, and there was a case too where, and a lot of people may shun this, but there isn't a written book or format on how you should paranormal investigate, because each case is unique in
It
its own
is.
way. And
It is.
there was a case that I took, uh, I want to say 2010, 11, something like that. And anyways, the short version of this story is the guy who lived in this house. Um, he had in the 90s come out as being gay,
Okay.
and that was not, to me. I don't care. I mean, people
Right.
do whatever they want. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
I don't care. You can do whatever you want, but uh, it was not socially accepted in this area that he lived,
Okay.
and he ended up taking his own life with a shotgun.
Wow.
Well, when I was called into the case, it was one of the family members,
Mm-hmm.
uh, and she told me. I asked every little detail. She told me every little thing about him, and she said that he had turned into an alcoholic
Okay.
uh, because of the stress of the fact that he was gay.
Okay.
And in this small town in North Carolina, where that kind of thing just at that time wasn't accepted,
Sure.
he turned to the bottle.
Mm-hmm.
So I investigated the house. I investigated the house. I investigated the house. Got nothing, 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 nothing. And I thought, okay, well, maybe I need to relate to him a little bit more.
Mm-hmm.
One of my colleagues who I work with frequently is gay.
Okay.
So I asked him if he could make the drive so I would have a gay guy with me. And I said, we're going to take a bottle of whiskey in this time, because they told me
Sure.
that whiskey was his favorite drink.
Okay.
And we sat down in the living room of this house and put 3 glasses out. One for me, one for Eddie, who was my colleague,
Mm-hmm.
still is my colleague, and he's gay. And then another one for the guy who committed suicide.
Okay.
And me and Eddie started to drink. That was one of the best EVPs I ever captured in my life.
What was it?
This guy, we asked him if he wanted a drink, and he said, yes, I want a drink.
Oh my God.
So it was,
Yes. I
that was
love
one of
that.
those cases where you had to, you got nothing, you got nothing, you got nothing
Mhm.
until you related to him,
Yes. Yes.
And a lot of people you would tell that story to, oh, you shouldn't do that on an investigation.
No, why?
But you know what? That's what needed to be done.
Contrary to what people think, you will have some discarnates who really don't want to communicate with you. And you have a team go in there, they kind of disappear. They kind of like make themselves scarce. Yes, there's some that want to communicate and want to give you VPs and tell their story and la, 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 la. And there's others that like, I don't want to have anything to do with you guys. Just leave me alone. I'm out of here. I'm going to the attic. I'm going to the basement. I'm going to that dark corner. I'm
Yeah.
going somewhere, and I'll just wait for you guys to leave.
Well, there have been cases. We had done a case from 2012 to 2016 that was up close to the border of Virginia, and it was for the mayor of that town. And
Okay.
that says something when we were talking earlier about how things were taboo 20 years ago.
Yes.
And now you got
Yes.
a politician who's willing to go on the record with this stuff.
Yes.
And allegedly, the entity in this house didn't like women. And we, like I said, we investigated this over the course of 4 years. And the best night we ever had was the night we just let the female investigators go in there.
Yeah.
And I sat outside in a car and I filmed the house from the outside. And the place went off
Yeah.
on the inside for those women.
Yes.
And while they are upstairs, all isolated to one room, all filming, all on film, I'm filming something walking across the entire downstairs
Oh my
of
God.
this mansion.
Oh.
But it was because we did what that entity wanted.
Yes.
It like women, so we left nothing but women in there.
Okay.
But you have these investigators that don't get that stuff.
Right.
Oh, we've all got to go in there, and no,
Or
you've got to do
sometimes-
what works. There's no general rule.
No. And some personalities are like that. Like they have their preferences. They're still there. It's not like they still have their likes and dislikes depending on who they were when they were alive. And sometimes if you do something that they care enough about, they come around. If you do something they really don't like, they also come around. And other times they just like want to hang out and just wait for the team to leave. Which is a good point that you made about when you have the ability to go back over an extended period of time under different conditions and see what happens. Because it wouldn't be the first time that you go. Oh, and by the way, one of the things that I wanted to mention before I forget, Stephen, that I tell, I've mentioned this before, is that, you could read a lot of books, you can go and see a lot of the shows, but nothing ever replaces field work, which is what you're describing. And that
That's
includes going to really boring investigations where nothing happens and you're like, I'm ready to like fall asleep. Okay. Or, we're going, like you said, that every situation is different. Every investigation is different just because maybe the people that are involved are different. The circumstances are different. And that field work, I think that's really what sets apart the real true paranormal researcher from the one that's just like in it for, because I want to do it because Zach is doing it or something like that.
Well, I'll tell you a story I tell a lot of people. The quickest case I ever worked was 15 minutes. And if we want to refer to these other people that would go in, they would probably have said it was a ghost, and they would have probably filmed and had their audio clip out and said yes. But this guy gets a hold of me. This was in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. And he said that it was the maintenance guy that worked for this business.
Okay.
And he's the first guy on the scene every morning.
Okay.
I'd say 6:45 in the morning. And he said that every morning when he would walk into the building, he would hear somebody walk across the attic.
Okay.
And I was like, okay, I can come check that out. I'll meet you there in the morning because obviously this is happening every day.
Right.
So how can I miss it, So I meet him there, and he goes, now look, he said, we're going to walk in here. I'm telling you, you are going to hear somebody walk across the attic. So we go in there. Sure enough, I hear do, 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 go right across.
And you're like, wow.
I was like, okay. I was like, I definitely wasn't a squirrel,
Right, exactly.
Because there's been many cases where a thermal camera has proven that their ghost was a squirrel. But and I said, wait a minute, man. I started looking around. And this was in peak of the summer, Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. Humidity's high, temperature's high, even at 7 o'clock in the morning,
Uh-huh.
And I said, when you open that door, you let the heat from the outside come inside. And that kicks the AC on.
Right.
Then when you shut the door, you and me stood here for a few minutes, and then we heard those footsteps. He goes, yeah. And I said, do you know how air conditioners work? You know how AC duct work? Do you know anything about it? And he said, no. And I said, well, I'm going to tell you what's above your head. What's above your head is this duct work that's going across the entire ceiling, and there are flaps every couple feet, maybe every 4, 5, 6 feet. And when the AC turns off, the air is coming backwards, basically. So after it stops blowing, those flaps close one at a time, which sounds like do, 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 somebody walking across the ceiling above you. And he used choice words,
I was gonna say that must have been a Kodak moment of his face.
And he said, I never realized that. I said, that's all it is, man. You're opening this door, it kicks the AC on. You shut the door, you're in here milling around for a few minutes, and then it's brought it back up to the temperature it needs to be, and it turns off, and it's just those flaps. That's all it is.
And it's like
15 minutes.
And you know what? But I don't know if you found this because of the reality TV with all these paranormal shows. Once upon a time, sometimes people wouldn't even jump to the conclusion of paranormal right away. But nowadays, it's almost like, that's a weird noise. That's what it is. Oh, it's a ghost. Or the D word, the demon. It's like, what? Doesn't anybody try to explain, like, an alternative? I mean...
Well, I'm going to tell you what a producer told me, because I have dealt with producers since 2007.
Okay.
And I have proposed many shows along the lines and stuff like that. I've been in a few of them. And I've seen how it works behind the scenes, and I've had, like I said, one of my good friends was from Ghost Hunters International, and she was the first to tell me stuff that people don't want to hear, sure. that's really happening. But I was pitching a show, which really irritated me, because a few years later, speaking of Zach Baggins, he came out with a show called Paranormal Challenge.
Right, exactly, yes.
Okay, well, I had come up with a concept called Ghost Trials.
Yeah.
And what it was going to be was not telling the paranormal investigators where they're going, just giving them a story. Just saying, oh, this place is haunted, this is the claims, these are the claims, blah, 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 the person died, whatever. You just fill their head full of a bunch of crap.
And see what happens.
And then you put them in there, and then you see if they come up with EVPs, if they come up with whatever, and then you come out, or they come out, and you judge them. It was like a judging kind of show, and you tell them, well, it was all made up. There was absolutely nothing there.
Exactly.
But you're saying you caught EVPs, you're saying you got this, and then sometimes maybe the place really is haunted.
Right.
It was basically to pick the best team. And I was talking to a producer. He's a very famous producer. He's done a few paranormal shows. Fact or Faked, he was one of the producers on. And he told me, Steven, he said, people just don't want their paranormal busted.
Oh, of course not.
He said, that's why we do these shows. They do not want it busted. So they didn't buy the idea, because I wanted to show people how it really was. With paranormal teams, are they really that good, or not? And he didn't like it, but 2 years later,
there you go.
Zach Baggins took that same concept and did it.
Yeah, but at the end, they only did I think it was like 3 shows like that, or 2, or something like that. It was very short-lived. It was. And you know what? I think personally that's what happened to Ghost Hunters. That they debunked a little bit too much. It was like, aren't there any ghosts out there? And I think that's why it just lost the excitement that people saw at the very beginning when the series started. As far as, paranormal investigations and using the, methods and equipment to try to capture evidence. But then it was towards the end, it was like no place was ever haunted or haunted enough, or just because, we can't capture evidence because we were here overnight, and, or the worst, which is it's not malicious. It's like so I think that's partially why I think that series
I liked
kind of
the first 2 seasons because it was more true to what is actually being done. because there were those episodes. There's nothing here. Blah 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 blah.
Right.
They did everything. They showed you these ways to disprove things, and I like that. But
Mm-hmm.
we are a niche genre, so the people watching those shows want entertainment, and that's kind of when Ghost Hunters got out of hand.
Right.
Where everything was something. Then they started faking this stuff with the live episodes and the collar tugs and the fishing line and the stuff they all got busted for. And it went from you always seeing Jason and Grant using equipment to the last half of the series. They
Right.
were never even carrying anything around.
No, they weren't. They
They were
weren't.
just walking around being a voice on the camera.
Right. And with a
It's
flashlight,
just,
and that was it, if that much. Yep.
yeah, it just and that's fine for me.
Mm-hmm.
If and I think at this point, anybody who has any inkling of common sense knows that these shows they're just for entertainment. They
Yeah.
have to sell advertising.
Yes.
They have to.
Yes.
Your best bet, if you want to really see paranormal investigating or paranormal research, is to watch groups online. Watch
Yeah.
the people who put their own
Mm-hmm.
stuff on YouTube. And
Yes.
that's what I've done for 11, 12 years now.
Yep.
And I've got an audience of 2 million,
Right. And that's
because
exactly what
it's the
happens.
real deal.
And like I said, and you're going to go to some places where nothing happens. Again, one of two things. Either there really isn't nothing there, or it's just not going to make an appearance for whatever reason.
And it might not like you.
And it might not like you,
You know,
exactly, or it doesn't
it,
like
it,
somebody there, or yeah.
exactly. It could be the people you work with. And that's like we discussed earlier in the show. You've got to work these locations over and over and over again. I've taken in team member A and team member B and team member C, and nothing happened. Then I brought in D, E, and F,
And
and
things
stuff
happen.
started to happen. It's there's so many factors that go into it.
Let me ask you something, Stephen. Have you ever been involved in an investigation or location, whatever, that you've gone into, that it just turned out like, I need to back out because this is more than what I expected? Either because once you went there, you felt or experienced something really malevolent. And by this, I mean beyond just the regular dead person thing going on.
Yes and no. My wife took a case years ago that was probably the most violent, for lack of a better word, terrifying
Mm-hmm.
case you can imagine. It's a movie waiting to happen. It really is.
Okay.
But again, this goes back to the maybe I'm psychotic kind of thing, where I'm not going to walk away from something like that. If there is something that is giving me that much, even if it hurts,
Right.
this is amazing. This is incredible. This is stuff that needs to be documented. This particular case was a plantation that was built 1840, something like that. They
Okay.
actually had slaves. There were remnants of 3 slave quarters, 2 of which were still standing.
Okay.
I believe it was about 90 acres, plus the plantation home itself. And what was there was extremely violent. And I wrote about it in the Dark Spirits book. And
Okay.
when we were talking about the spiritual magnetism,
Mm-hmm.
we worked that case for 2 years.
Okay.
And the violence, the evil, for lack of a better word, that was the stuff that was following us everywhere.
Okay.
When we would leave that place, we would spend 3-4 days to a week at a time at this location, and there's no power, there's no water.
Okay.
We had our campers, our trailers with equipment and cameras, and it was basically roughing it.
Okay.
We had firearms because we were on 90 acres of
Right.
uncharted territory, so
Yeah.
to speak. There's wildlife there, wild boar, stuff like that. So you needed to be armed in case something like that would happen. And this was a location where I saw an investigator picked up in the air and thrown against a wall.
Whoa.
I myself was hit in the face, knocked down a flight of steps,
Holy crap.
and about an hour later, when another investigator actually looked at me, there were 3 slashes across my cheek. This is all documented. There's photography, there's video. There are links you can watch all this stuff from this case.
Okay.
Another investigator knocked down a flight of steps. Another investigator went to a seizure. There were 2 amazing things that still to this day, this case was 2011, 2012, the best thermal camera captures I have to this date. One was we were out, there were what used to be soybean fields.
Okay.
And we threw a thermal camera up, and there were 5 figures standing in that field, giving off heat.
What?
But to the naked eye, we're not there. But on the thermal camera, you could see them.
Wow.
That was one thing. The best thing, in the attic of the plantation home itself, we're 3 stories up in the air.
Uh-huh.
I had left a thermal camera. This was one of those $30,000 thermal cameras. Okay, this is not the little $300 thing from Amazon.
Uh-huh.
You know, I had left it running in the attic because there was a lot of activity up there. And if you want to visualize this, the attic, about the size of your average house. Okay. It was the length of the house, but it was nothing but attic. In the center were the stairs you would come up and down. Mm-hmm. And across the room were 2 windows, one on both sides.
Okay.
Very weird attic where on both sides of the walls you could actually access the rafters.
Okay.
So you could go behind the walls, like they were hidden rooms, so to speak. And my wife-to-be and I were sitting in these rafters. So we're not actually in the attic part where the thermal camera's filming. Mm-hmm. We're in the rafters, and I'm filming in there.
Right.
And it's really late, and I say some choice words, and she's like, what? And I said, I can swear all the way across these rafters there's something moving down there. And, I'm thinking maybe a raccoon, some kind of animal. And then my eyes focus, and I see it, and again, a few choice words come out. And she sees it too.
Oh.
Well, the next morning, we decide to review the thermal camera. The thermal camera shows, okay, now say we're on the left side of the attic behind the wall. Okay. From the right comes this sphere, probably about the size of a basketball.
Okay.
Okay, you can see it in the first window. Then it disappears. Then when it gets to the second window, which is closer to us, it's full-bodied. Absolutely a person looking like they're almost like Santa Claus, like they're carrying a sack.
Okay.
Or like a slave would, or a Haitian, you know what I mean, back at that time period.
Okay.
And then the second it goes through the wall is when you hear my choice words, when her and I actually made eye contact with what we saw at the end of the rafters. Now, what makes that clip even more interesting is the fact the thermal camera, you saw it in that first window pane as a sphere.
Okay.
It disappears, then shows up in the next window, full-bodied. That means it wasn't even in the room. It was 3 stories up in the air outside. Otherwise, you would have seen it go across the entire room. You see what I'm saying?
Exactly.
You only saw it in the windows.
Right, when it passed by the windows.
That was incredible.
And
but that was one of those cases we just could not leave because it just kept giving and giving and giving. And yes, people were getting hurt, but everybody was willing. Everybody had the opportunity. Look, you can bow out anytime you want. Nobody wanted to. This was just too good. We've got to document this stuff.
Would you? Are we talking here human entity, non-human, or a mix? Especially that violent stuff.
I don't know because my view on those things are slightly different than most people. I think if you are a rapist or a child molester or a murderer or just a prick in real life,
you still one in the afterlife.
in 10 to 1, you're going to be the same thing in the afterlife, only you're going to
Yes,
have attributes we don't have.
absolutely.
And that's what people often mislabel as a demon.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
It's just a bad person, or they were a bad person.
Yeah.
But that place is very unique. Inhuman, I would almost agree. It was just because there were images, there were other video clips. I'll have to shoot you some of this footage, and it'll just
Right.
blow
I
your
would.
mind. Where things did look like creatures, like just something out of a movie. It just
Right.
it and in this particular location, it would mimic us.
Oh,
It
one
would
of
it would
those, huh?
right. It would one person would be in the building and hear another investigator upstairs that is not in the building. So
Wow.
it could sound like us, and it's definitely a good read. I'll
I'm
put
gonna
it
tell
to
you
you
something,
that way.
and I don't know why that mimicking stuff is so prevalent in especially dark hauntings. It's almost like that either one of two things,
It's
either the
bait.
mimicking or the doppelganger effect, where you kind of think you see the person, but then you realize it's not that person, or that person wasn't there, or something along those lines. That's like the ability
It's
to play with your
bait.
mind, your senses.
Yeah, it's if something's out to harm you, and especially in a realm that we have no control
Oh
over.
hell.
They're going to do whatever they can, and there are people in real life who can do 40 different voices. They can do celebrity voices, they can
Yeah,
mimic singers. And so what's to say you can't do that in the afterlife?
sure.
You know?
Well, it's at the end of the day, really, and I think this is what people don't realize as far as being this kind of scary, or even it's not like scary Hollywood. It's like you have an entity that's intelligent enough to want to manipulate you by mimicking, either with voice or even with appearance, to be somebody in your team. That shows a lot of will, a lot of intent, more than just, oh, this is a person that used to live here and they're just going about their daily, routine, and you happen to see them. This is
Yeah.
the true hallmarks of an active, intelligent haunting, and the desire to manipulate. And when you start getting into that, like you said, if what you've got was a person, or let's say that was an SOB in life, the death didn't make him any better. And and I've explained it to people, like you said, just because sometimes people go into the presence of certain things and they say, "Oh man, I got this really bad feeling. It felt like so malevolent." And I said, this is exactly the same thing when you come in contact with somebody that's alive, that whether they're psychopathic or there's just something off about them, that you feel like, I need to get away from this person. This is not a good person. Same thing. The only thing is that they're dead. And you get that
Right.
vibe of, I need to get away from this feeling of being around whatever this is. And I think that it's, which I imagine when you wrote that book, Dark Spirits, Stephen, this is about those type of investigations that you've done where what you came across was just not the regular, like I said, old dead person, a regular dead person who's just like, oh, I don't want to, this is what's my house. It sounds like definitely where you're talking, where people are being physically attacked. That is very dark.
Well, not even physically attacked, but just mentally changed forever. I
Yes.
mean, that investigation in particular ended the pit. It ended the team that I created. It was
Yes.
over. When
Yes.
we finally called it quits from that location, that was it.
Yeah.
There was no more team, and only a few of us from that particular group continued to work together.
Well,
It took a mental toll on everybody.
I think some people also, and I'm glad you bring that up, especially for these paranormal enthusiasts who think, oh, I want to go out there. And I go, when you run across stuff like that, you can't, especially when you witness something like really truly scary, dark, like, whoa, it's like, you can't unsee it. You can't undo the knowledge that you know that this exists. Like, this is the stuff you're going to think about the next time you go to sleep and turn off your lights. It's like, this was not the movies where, yeah, you get scared and, oh, the movie's over, okay, let's go home. Yeah, that was make-believe. When you witness this firsthand more than once, okay, you can't undo that knowledge. No matter how much you wish you didn't know. It's like, man, I wish, who told me I wanted to know about this? It's like, yeah. Yeah.
And that goes back to what you asked earlier, when you're truly in this for the answers, there's just a part of your life that you're just willing to give up.
Yes.
And you just can't turn away from that.
Yes.
There are many people say, no, I'm not messing with that, or they're out of there,
Yes.
But
and you know what? Yep.
Those are so few and far between. Television wants to make you think it's every other haunting that's like that, but when you get something like that, it's very difficult to walk away from it because you don't know if you'll ever have that opportunity again.
Right.
As risky as it is, you got to ask yourself, why are you doing this?
Right. And that's the thing is, like, once you go in there, like, once you open Pandora's box, once you're there, okay, especially when you get the feel of, okay, that this has got a lot of things that are going to make you uncomfortable, or like you said, that affect you, that you just can't. It's not like, when you're at work and it's like, okay, quitting time, I'm going home now. When you're involved in this type of case, you don't sometimes have that option. It kind of invades your life in other areas.
Well, and you have a responsibility too. When you take a client's case,
yes,
whether it be confidential or they want it out in the open, whatever, you have a responsibility. You don't just say, "Oh yeah, you're screwed. I'm out of here." That's just not how it works in real life.
Of course, and it's a cautionary tale, and I'm sure there's a lot of people out there, especially that don't have the experience. I'll go, oh, sure, okay, all right. But I really want to get scared. It's like, okay, all right, whatever. Some people are built for it, some are not. But anyway, I wanted to ask you, Stephen, about this book, the Norman book, the doll book, because I know there's a whole set of people out there that have a distinct fear of inanimate objects such as dolls.
Yeah. I never did, and I never subscribed to the idea of haunted objects in general.
Mm-hmm.
Although my wife and I have a plethora of allegedly haunted objects all through the house. Investigations that we've done where the clients believed it's because of this specific item. Here, just take it. Just get it out of my house.
Right. I don't want it.
Okay, we'll take it. That's a cool little music box,
Yes.
But I never really got into the doll thing. I never believed it. I don't really want to say I never believed it. I just never experienced it, I
right,
guess.
And I know what you mean, yeah.
To say, I could say yay or nay. And the funny thing about Norman being a book is that was the first time I actually wrote a book where one particular case was the entire story.
Okay.
All of my books prior to that chronicled my investigations. So each chapter was an investigation. So once you finished one chapter, you were done with that investigation and you're on to the next.
Okay. Yes.
And with my publisher, I was working on a book called Testaments of the Supernatural.
Okay.
And Norman was one of the chapters. And they called me and they said, we really like this chapter on this doll. Can you do a whole book on this? And
right. It took on a life of its own, no pun intended.
Yeah, I said, yeah, actually I could. This was one of those things where it was ongoing, and we acquired the doll from a secondhand shop, an antique shop, whatever you want to call it, and brought it into the house, and things started to happen enough to where it could be documented. And when your wife and yourself are paranormal researchers and you have everything right there at your fingertips,
yes.
We put surveillance up through the whole house, which is still up to this day. And Norman is the documentation of Norman is never ending because he lives with us.
Right.
He's here in a box, now. In the book, he was in a different situation at the end of the book, but now he's in a box on the shelf. But it was one of those things where there was so much to tell about this, and for me, it was a first to really opening my mind to the fact that can an entity really do that? Take on an object and become that object and project itself from that object.
Right.
Use it as a Trojan horse, so to speak.
Exactly. That's a very good analogy there. Very good. As far as most people don't realize it, that's exactly what it is.
And the funny thing is, the book was released on April 8th, like a month and a half ago. Mm-hmm. And it has become my bestseller. And it was something I would have never thought would have ever happened in my life. Something in our own home, not somebody else's investigation, because that's all I ever wrote about before. Were investigations up and down the East Coast, other people's stories. And this was our own. This was something we could control on a daily basis. We could investigate on a daily basis.
Right,
and,
exactly.
It's ongoing, and even though there is an end to that book, we still have him. And
well, I was going to ask you, putting him away in the box, what has happened? Has that helped, or is it?
No, and I can't go into that too much because I have a book I'm working on right now, a manuscript I'm working on right now about another case.
Okay.
But following that, there is going to be a sequel to Norman.
Okay.
I hate using that word sequel because it just sounds like it's made up. But it just shows people that research isn't done in one day.
No,
and when it's all said and done, Norman, the book, was, 6-8 months worth of research.
Yeah. From
the point we acquired him to the point I pretty much had to get the manuscript to the publisher. Okay. So it didn't stop there, obviously. We still live with it every day. So everything still continues to be documented. And Norman will ride for a while out there in the marketing world. And then, probably, my next book comes out in 2019, which is, like I said, another person's story, their case, or, case we have worked for a few years. And then a follow-up to Norman will probably come in 2020. So you're talking, 3-4 years after what you're reading now in Norman is going to come out in 2020. What's happened since then? Right,
exactly, in the intervening time.
Right.
And people don't realize, because that now there's myself included, where people leave stuff out in the curb or the garage sale. And I've said it before in other shows. I go, folks, be a little bit careful when you either buy or pick up stuff. If you get a funky feeling, leave it. Because
you never know.
You never know. It just never know. If you get, you go to something and don't blow it off as like, oh, it's just my imagination. It's a great deal, or maybe there's a reason why it's a great deal. It's like, leave it. Leave it. Because
it has definitely opened my mind to those kind of things. And, it's happened to my wife before. The case we were talking about earlier up near Virginia with the mayor. He had all these antiques throughout his house.
Yes.
And my wife's, she's fascinated with stones, and that kind of thing, gemstones and stuff. And there was a stone from his house, whether it be the actual stone or one that's a carbon copy of it, that just showed up at our house.
What?
And she found it one day and thought I was joking around. Like I had just set it there and like, haha,
wow.
I knew nothing about it. And then it disappears. Then it shows up in a different place in the house. And then it showed up in her car.
So it poured it over there.
Right. It was.
What?
starting to think, how is this stuff even possible, you know? And then, of course, along comes Norman, and you start to realize that there's more than... Sometimes you can see things that are happening, sometimes you can't.
Yes.
And when it's right here in your own home, you couldn't ask for anything better.
Yes.
You know,
Well, it almost begs a question like, you absolutely, it sounds more the best people to have the Norman doll. You know, sometimes those things go to the wrong people, but you guys sound like you're the right ones to have it.
yeah, it's been fun. It's been exciting. It's been scary. And it's been eye-opening,
Yes.
especially for me, you know. At that point, you know, that was 20-some years in the field, and the first time that I'm doing tests on an inanimate object.
Yes.
You know, and what's interesting about Norman, the doll itself is from 1962.
Okay.
He was manufactured by Mattel, and his real name's Matty.
Okay.
He was Matty Mattel. He was their mascot. I
Okay.
called him Norman when we brought him home, just because Norman. I don't know why. You know, I really don't know why I said Norman, because he wasn't normal. I don't know. It was just he just looked kind of freaky to be like Mattel's, you know,
Right.
mascot. And you know, he isn't mechanical in any, or electrical, I should say,
Right.
in any way. He has a pull string in the back, which when you pull it, it just sounds like a bunch of garbled Latin. I mean, he doesn't even work right, you know, because he's that old.
I was going to say, yeah, because of the age.
There's nothing, he doesn't take batteries. There's just nothing electrical about him. And when these things started to happen, I thought, well, I'll do some standardized tests with him. And I put, I don't know if you're familiar with ionic testers, but ionic testers,
Yes.
they basically read the ionic energy that's in the air.
Yes.
Human beings give off ionic, everything does. And I had 3 of these testers. I put one between his legs, one on his head, and one beside him. And I stood back, and I had a camera on a tripod fixated on him. And these particular testers light up
Okay.
when ionic energy hits the antennas. There's little antennas that come out of these little boxes. So if you would wave your hand over one of these, you would cause the light to go off from your ionic energy. Well, he was giving off ionic energy, being an atom.
What? And
And I
you're
was
like,
like,
from
okay.
where? How's it
Yeah.
doing
I was
this?
like, all right, that's one thing. All right, let's go to the next thing. So I pulled out. Oh, now I'm being... There goes the demon dogs we were talking about
Don't
earlier.
worry about it. I got my own in my background all having their moment.
So the next thing was, okay, let's do a little temperature read on this guy. Okay, the house is temperature controlled. It was 74 degrees in the house. So I shoot a temperature gun on him, and he reads 74 degrees. Within maybe 20, 30 seconds, without moving the gun, all on film, he drops from 74 to 54, 53 degrees.
What?
Now, how is that even possible?
I know. That's a 20-degree difference.
20-degree difference. Then came the EMF testing, and he was giving off reads higher than a refrigerator would. And he is electrical in no way.
So where's it coming from? What?
Exactly.
That is incredible.
And so, yeah, of course it goes from there. I'm not going to ruin the book for anybody, but it got pretty insane around here for a moment in time.
And let me ask you, how long did it take for you to kind of figure it out that the source was Norman when things started happening? Was it right away, or did it take you like...
No, not right away. It was... Yeah, I didn't want to believe it. You know, it was more like, okay, it's something else. It's maybe our house is just haunted. Maybe it's something we brought back with us from another investigation, like we talked about earlier in the show. You know, but the stuff kept happening with him, or in the house, but it all seemed related to him. And the moment it was sold to me was a day I was babysitting our grandkids.
Okay.
And Lindsay and Liam were here. They were in the bedroom, and I'm on my computer working, doing stuff, writing stuff. Lindsay's on her tablet, playing a game or whatever, and Liam's laying on the bed, facing the TV, watching the TV. And Liam grabs my attention and says, Norman's on the bed. Because they all knew who Norman was. I mean, he was like a conversation piece.
Right.
Every time somebody came over, what is this doll that's, And I turn around, Norman's on the bed, which that's not where he started. He was sitting on a dresser. Okay, and before that, he was on the headboard of our bed. I was like, okay, these kids are messing with me because my back's turned to them. You know what I'm saying? So I just kind of ignored it. Well, then it goes on and a little bit more. And I go to use the restroom, and Lindsay's screaming, Norman moved again. I'm like, okay, Lindsay, yeah, all right, And I come out, and Liam is sitting Indian style, and he's facing Norman. And he's completely silent, like he's in this trance. Like, what in the world is this kid doing? Right? So I sit back down at the computer. This is all on surveillance, because, again, we put surveillance up through the whole house. So finally, the curiosity gets the better of me. And I go over to the surveillance system, and I kind of rewind it, yeah. I'm dating myself again. I scroll back on this digital equipment, and to the point where they said he moved. Well, there was a glitch in the surveillance from the point he was on the dresser to the point he shows up on the bed.
Are you serious?
Well, then, as you see me, and there's pictures from the surveillance in the book. Obviously, you can't show the video in the book,
right.
But you can see the sequence of events in the pictures, the screenshots. My back is turned to them. I'm working on the computer, and you see this doll, especially in the video. It gives me chills. This is what sold it for me, where I knew it was him. The doll turns its head and looks at me.
Oh, crap.
But I don't know this is going on.
I swear to God, I'm getting goosebumps as you're saying this. Oh,
and then turns its head back to Liam, who's watching TV, and then Liam turns around and sees the fact that Norman's moving, and Liam starts smiling. He's a kid. He probably just thinks it's a toy that does that, Well, then Norman did something that he can't physically do. He looked down. His head actually looks down. Well, you can't even physically take your hand with this doll's head and make him look down. You just can't do it. He's not built that way. And I see this all on the surveillance. And I'm like, you have got to be kidding me. It was like he looked to see if I was paying attention.
Right.
And then he turned and he looked at Liam. Then that's when Liam turns around and starts sitting Indian style and starts staring at the doll. Well, I don't know if it got to him or what, but then Liam starts throwing toys at it, like he's mad at it.
Right.
Like, what in the world? And I can remember my wife was, like I said, she's a nurse. She was working, and I'd send her a message on Facebook or over the phone or something. I said, "You're never going to believe what we just got on surveillance.
Norman's moving." Oh.
You're just not even going to believe it, And it just went on from there. And that was the moment I knew there was something. It was the doll. When you see a doll move on its own,
yes,
like that, without any kind of intervention whatsoever, especially when he's not mechanical,
right?
You can't deny it.
Right, that you can't even say, it was a malfunction, something in there turned on when it's not supposed to. Right,
and I try not to, but occasionally I'll go and I'll read reviews of my books and stuff just to see what people say. And, they're all so interested, like they want to actually see all this surveillance footage, not the screenshots, but they want to actually see. And we've considered it, we've talked about it, like doing a documentary on Norman and showing all of this video footage, from the stuff that where the dogs were acting weird and backing up from him and being
That's
afraid of, any other toy they'd chew the crap out of. You know what I mean? They would play with. Oh, see, he just spoke up. He was just saying, "Yep, don't even talk about it." But Norman, they would back away from, like they were totally scared of him. It
wow.
so it's
And
it's
you know what?
interesting.
And the reason why I say this is that me and my husband, well, my husband, he purchased a haunted vehicle. It's as a matter of fact, that's why we were on Paranormal Survivor about. And it's the reason why I say this, as far as like things coming to the right people. He had bought this. It's an old muscle car from somebody across the state, and like within maybe a couple of months of purchasing it, and he had already started experiencing. He meets me, which I'm a paranormal investigator. It was like, what, like, okay, what are the chances are that this is going to happen? And this and that in and of itself, even with my experience, and I saw a lot of things that that didn't come out when we did the show. And that's like something that's outside, and even then, things were happening that you're like, oh God. So I can imagine having an item like a doll that's actually inside your house and being able to capture what you did. That's got
Well,
to be like what?
it would. At first, I didn't agree to write about it. I just wanted it to be a chapter, and it said and done, they're on to the next chapter, because it's one of those things. It sounds so crazy, and so unbelievable and so Hollywood
But
that, but at the same time, it's like, look, it happened. It's
you know
part
what?
of the paranormal. You've got to put it out there.
I would be curious to know if there was a reason why you named it Norman.
Well,
No.
what's funny about that is, I don't know if you've heard the name Rosemary Ellen Guiley.
Yes, of course.
Okay, well, she wrote the foreword to the book.
Okay.
I had talked to her, and she saw the footage. I sent her all the footage,
Mm-hmm.
and she was blown away by it. And
Okay.
of course, she's got a few years on me,
Mm-hmm.
and she said, "Oh yeah, I would love to contribute to why I feel that." Basically, she just had more experience with haunted objects.
Right.
She worked a lot with John Zaffis and stuff like
Mm-hmm.
that. So she wrote the foreword to the book. Well, Darren Evans, uh, who's a real good friend of mine, he kind of does the Ouija board stuff,
Okay.
like you were talking about earlier.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you've ever heard of Zozo.
Of course.
Okay, well, Darren Evans is the what's the word I'm looking for? The authority on
Okay.
Zozo. Okay,
Okay.
he's the guy who put Zozo on the map,
Okay.
and him and I have discussed Zozo documentaries and stuff,
Mm-hmm.
and so I talked to him, and when he gets cool footage, he sends it to me. He's like, dissect this, man, before I tell people it's this or that, tell me
Right.
if you
Yeah.
can find any flaws. And I started talking to him about Norman, and anyways, I sent him the footage, and he was blown away. And I said, you know what,
Bet.
man, why don't you write the afterword for the book? So I've kind of got, Rosemary, who is
Mm-hmm.
so familiar with all this haunted object stuff, and then
Exactly.
you, who is very familiar with possessed stuff, and his ending to the book was so good because he says when you think of Norman,
Mm-hmm.
you think of Norman Bates. You think
Exactly.
there's never anything good to come from a Norman,
I know.
basically.
It's such an innocuous name until Norman Bates was invented.
Right, and like I said, when Christina and I brought him home, and I was like, I'm not calling this thing Matty, and
Yeah.
it was basically just because he was an antique,
Right.
and
Exactly.
because we collect that kind of stuff, and I just said just the name Norman just came out, it was like because he's not normal,
And that's the
he's just
thing.
not
There's
normal
like
looking to me.
70, 80, 90. That's what it's what almost 50 years of existence that who knows what
Right.
happened in and around it to, what history,
Well,
what unknown history.
when you read the book, we could go another 4 hours
Oh, I
on the
know, I
back
know, I
on the
know.
backstory
Let me ask you,
of.
and I guess the reason I bring it up is like, I imagine this is something that would be impossible to find out. You understand? I don't know if the person you bought it from had it for a long time, or if it was something that ended up with them after going through a number of hands, which is the big question mark. Like, you know, what happened in or around this doll that now this is the end product, but people
Well,
are going to have to read the book to find out.
the backstory is in there, and
Okay, okay, okay.
it was discovered, and the ladies that sold Norman, or well, Maddie, to us, uh, they're the ones that kind of filled us in on how they acquired Maddie,
Oh,
and
okay, okay.
he had been sitting in that shop forever, and
Oh,
there is a very tragic story that goes along with that doll.
oh,
And, of course, I'm thinking this is just a yarn from two old women.
uh-huh.
And then, of course, we start to experience what we start to experience. Um, but the doll was, I'll go ahead and tell you a little bit of it. The
Yes.
doll was given um, to a woman who was given birth, and she was to have twins.
Oh,
And when she gave birth, the daughter survived, but the son did not.
oh,
And the person who was bringing Maddie as the gift gave it to the mother. And the daughter, of course, grew up with Maddie the doll.
oh my
Well,
God.
it is either speculated or believed that whether you want to call it the unborn or the
Yeah,
stillborn
exactly.
brother, her brother, went into this doll.
Oh God.
And then that raised the question, was the doll infantile still to this day?
Right.
Or because, using that Trojan horse
Mm-hmm.
analogy again, did it grow and learn like any other person would?
Right.
And at the time we acquired it, would have made it a 54-year-old man.
Yes. And you know what? I have heard of that theory where they say that in some cases the spirits age proportionately as to, in other words, like you said, what might have started out as a child or a stillborn infant, it
Hmm.
is now a 50 something year old adult. And I
Well,
have heard of that theory.
I
And
won't ruin the
no,
entire
it's like people are going to have
origin
to buy the book, man. I
story.
got to buy the book.
I
I didn't
won't ruin
realize
the
that you had
entire
that
origin story.
backstory.
But the ladies told us that the surviving girl, now an adult, obviously, um, basically donated the doll to this antique shop.
Right.
Why she wanted rid of it, I can only imagine.
I
Uh,
ma- exactly.
but
Like, well, it's like what we
I'm
were talking
trying
about. Maybe
very
when you're a kid, you go with it, but then as you become an adult, you realize my doll's not supposed to be doing that. What's going on? That's yeah.
I'm trying very hard to get the. I would love to talk to the daughter, the woman who gave the
Right.
doll up, and just hear her story.
That would be
Hear
yeah.
what she experienced, why she got rid of it. I would love to have that for the next book about
That would be
Norman, to go
fantastic.
with, what I already have for that next book. Um,
Well, it's like
but we'll see.
that is so interesting. Stephen, thank you so very much for spending this time. The interview has been fantastic. All your stories are so
Oh, it was
interesting,
fun.
but this last thing about Norman, oh, I'm telling you, of all the things that could get possessed, or like you said, the Trojan horse, a doll, which we all think of innocently as a child's toy, that's the one that, I mean, I know there's some people that are scared of it, but I myself am not, but I can absolutely see that why that would be chosen as a Trojan horse, or in this case, because of the circumstances you described. Wow.
Well, it's funny you say that because Rosemary, In the opening of my book, that's pretty much what she says. That dolls are often used as vessels because they're so innocent looking,
Yeah.
and they can easily manipulate a child.
Yes.
You know,
Yes. Absolutely. Or in this case where you had a birth, a twin birth, maybe this was one spirit's desire to stay close to its twin. And what better way than this is the best thing they could do was go into that toy
right?
to remain close to the twin. Oh my God. The possibilities are endless, but with bated breath, folks, go pick up this book. I know I am. Again, Stephen, thank you so much. You've been great. You're wonderful. And I wish you
Yes,
the best
ma'am.
of luck on all your future projects.
Thank
And
you.
I will be following up. And I would love, and I know you're really busy, but if you ever uh, do put those, what you filmed with Norman as a documentary, I think that's such a fantastic idea.
Well,
That's,
just watch my website. My
yes,
website's MonsterVisionTV.net,
yes.
or MonsterVisionTV.org.
Okay.
Um, you can watch the documentary we were talking about earlier about
Hmm.
the wine bistro. You can watch it right there for free.
Oh, perfect,
Um,
perfect. Anyway,
but
I'm going to
there's some
include,
stuff.
I'll include the website on the credits of the show. But again, for the people that are listening to this in podcast, this is where they can go. As far as, and if they want to purchase the books, where on Amazon or on your site or
Hey, you can go to Barnes. I walked into a Barnes and Noble in Jacksonville, North
okay,
Carolina, on Monday, and
it
they
was
were
there.
sitting there.
Perfect. Okay,
Yeah.
excellent, excellent. Again, thank you so very much. You've been wonderful, Stephen. Good luck to you on all your projects.
Thank you, ma'am. I enjoyed the show.
Likewise, take care. Bye bye.
Bye bye.
Oh, guys. Yes. I know a lot of you are thinking, oh, wow. Let me tell you something. Again, this is one of these paranormal investigators with a lot of years experience. And, I've talked about this before. This is somebody that's been investigating before. They developed all these gazillion million, um, you know, cameras and things to measure every little thing. And that, by the way, is my cockatiel that decides that it wants to talk to me. But anyway, in case you guys are picking up on that, I always have a special place in my heart for those researchers who have been around before the advent of the reality shows, before the advent of all these contraptions and gadgets, where basically you, maybe a camera was the most you had, maybe filming sometimes, psychics. There was still a lot of worthwhile stuff that was caught, a lot of it, unfortunately, that you couldn't catch, but still, in other words, your perspective is different as far as, like he said, despite all the things that now come up, along with it has come the ability to fake stuff. So back then you didn't, believe me, you couldn't. There was just no way to do it. You spent a lot of money, sometimes developing film because there was no way to do it otherwise. Then you were very happy if you caught just one decent photograph. But yeah, if you think about, and I've said this before, for the people in other words, if you're one of these people that's on the fence about doing paranormal research, but you're not really sure, better to do it as a legend tripper than get really heavily involved in it, because one of two things. One, you're going to go to some type of investigation where it's really boring and you're going to be like, this sucks. Okay. Or you're going to end up in one of these investigations or in some location where what's really there is intelligent and malevolent, like what he described. Maybe what they call that beginner's luck. So if you're one of these, and I've said before in other shows, some groups now will basically bring along like a potential member. In other words, try it on for size. Not all of them do, some do. You can do that as well. But I'm telling you, really think, because I wasn't kidding, that part where I say when you come across one of these very sinister and dark investigations, as in, well, not the investigation itself, but whatever is there, like he described about that plantation, that everybody was affected, even though they kept going back to it for more, for what I think he said 2 years, or and they all experienced again. And I've said this in other shows, and I'm glad he brought it up. When you run across something like this that's really intelligent and manipulative, okay, if you think that once you leave the site, it just stays there, and a lot of people, and by no means, and I'm not saying you could pray, you could take protective measures based on your whatever your beliefs are, whether religious, spiritual, whatever, saging, whatever, never. But a few weeks ago, I interviewed another paranormal researcher and author called Debbie Chestnut. And one of the things that Debbie described when she came across like a really dark, dark, dark entity that was non-human, by the way. It's kind of the same thing. Went to an older house. And one of the things she said was, and at that time she didn't have that much experience, and that's why she said was, I didn't realize when I came across it, okay, what I was dealing with. And I kind of knew it, but I proceeded anyway. And she said, some of these entities, they take it as when you do not withdraw as acceptance. Okay? And by this I mean that sometimes when you go to these locations, even for an investigation, once you keep going back, because of course you want to further the investigation, especially if you've been capturing really interesting stuff, they're going to take it as either a challenge or an acceptance of them in trying to invade your space, your life, invade you spiritually, mentally. And if you're well protected and you're okay, you don't have any broken boundaries in your life, in your emotions, you're going to experience some stuff, but you're going to be okay. But again, once you see that, you can't unsee it. And the reason why I'm telling you this is there's some people that can run across this and they're fascinated and they're encouraged, even if they're scared, and they proceed, which is what Stephen is describing. There's a whole bunch of people that it's like, oh my God, I don't want this to be true. Wow. Oh my God, now I've got things. I just heard stuff moving around in my kitchen, and I've never had that problem before. Or I'm having really bad nightmares, and they don't go away. Or it's like once you can't withdraw, you can't pretend you don't know it, you can't unknow it. That's what I'm saying, guys. If you're really into doing paranormal research, think good and hard about just being a legend tripper and maybe taking some paranormal tours versus going into this with both feet. Because inevitably, if you stick to it, you're going to run across, to some extent, a location where what's there is very manipulative and, for lack of a better word, spiritually dangerous, if not physically dangerous. And once you're in it, sometimes you cannot back out. As a matter of fact, my experience, like I said before, the weakest link, the most vulnerable, is the one that they will target. So, I know there's a lot of people going out there, oh, I want to do this. There's more to it than just what you see on the reality TV shows. That people see it like, oh my God, these people make a living and all they're doing is going from location to location, exploring and having these adventures and, trying to capture evidence. Wow, that's so exciting. But the real world, like he said, really the ones that you see doing the real work, and I've said this in other shows, are the regular paranormal investigators. People you never know about, that you don't hear about. These paranormal groups, the ones that I've said that have gelled, that have stayed together, that haven't dissolved, that go out there on the different types of investigations. They go to the ones that it's like, hey, there's nothing supernatural here. You just guys got some type of weird stuff going on in your family, and you're trying to put it off on the supernatural, or you've got mental illness or whatever. And then you come across the real stuff, some more active than others. Um, those are the ones that really, really, and I guarantee you, each of those groups, especially the members that have been there maybe from the beginning, they will all tell you that at some point in time they had this thing affecting them outside of an investigation or outside of the location of where it was. Whether it was temporary or more intrusive to the point that in some cases, which is why I asked them, that they say, I've got to stop investigating for a bit. Whether it's a couple of weeks, a couple of months, and sometimes as long as a year or 2 years, they step back because they realize if I don't, this is going to take over too much of my life. And like he says, you become that magnetism, but there's always a boundary that you can push off from and say no. But I'm telling you, most paranormal researchers that have been around for a while will tell you that there's times that you psychically know, spiritually know, you feel it, and hopefully you pay attention to it where you say, you know what, I'm going to take a sabbatical, as in, I'm not going to do any more investigations. And some of them will even go as far as, not only will they not engage in active investigations, they don't even want to be brought into consultant stuff. They say, look, I'm going to cut off from everything for 6 months. I'm not going to look at cases. I don't want to consult on cases. I don't want nothing. I need to totally, totally cut my bonds with the supernatural world for X amount of time. All right? And that's what I'm saying. Supernatural world, you can't give him an injunction. Hey, no trespassing. You can't come. It doesn't work that way. Well, anyway, guys, I hope you liked the show. I know I loved it. I love listening to what Stephen had to say. Check out his books. Check out, as a matter of fact, go on his website if you want to see the movie that he's got on there now. Plus, hopefully also, if he does do the documentary, that's where it's going to appear as far as notification of it. Catch me on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. True Believers, do not forget to send me in your true ghost stories. I look forward to talking to you guys, listening to what's up in your supernatural world, whatever it may be. Again, don't forget that I'm going to be back every week with a new show, and I've got some fantastic, wonderful guests coming on that I know you guys are going to be super, super, super excited to listen to their stories, whatever it is that they're involved in the supernatural about. So again, thank you so very much for being part of my audience. You are all wonderful. Take care.